Welcome back to Table for Two, the podcast where faith, family, and real life meet around the table.
We're Jason and Nicole Barnett, a married couple in ministry who's learning, laughing, and leading together. And maybe stirring the pot just a little this week.
Yeah, today's episode is called Liberty and Submission. And we're talking about something that tends to make people squirm. Authority, headship, and the whole umbrella of protection metaphor.
But don't worry, we're not here to throw stones. At least, not intentionally. We're just pulling back the layers of theology that many of us grew up with and asking, does it hold up?
So buckle in, whether you've ever heard phrases like, a woman should stay in the kitchen, or you just want a better picture of what mutual submission looks like in real life. This one's for you. This is Table for Two.
Through storms and swallowed our noise. Church keys in hand, coffee in mugs. Our lives held together by grace and a few hugs. They said she submits, we said we both do. It's not about ladders, it's me and you. Serving the kingdom in aprons and jeans. Laugh lines and calloused hands and holy routines. At this table for two, there's room for you. Pull up a chair, we'll tell the truth. From love and faith with the side of faith-filled talk.
Now, before we start poking the umbrella, let's lighten things up a bit.
I figured our episode was going to lighten everything up. Well, anyway, here's today's question. What's one household chore you secretly enjoy and one you'd happily never do again?
Well, I can think of about 1 billion that I'd happily never do again. Why don't you share first?
All right. I absolutely love cooking and fixing dinner, fixing breakfast. Lunch, not so much. Lunch is kind of an annoyance. Like, go make yourself a sandwich. But I love fixing food. I love cooking. Now, on the flip side of that, I absolutely hate doing the dishes. I love cooking, but I hate doing the dishes. So I'm trying to teach myself to cook with as few dishes as possible. But that's not always
and
easy.
Use as many paper plates as we can.
Yes. Paper plates are my best friend. And if they ever make disposable pots and pans, I will hand them my money.
I think my favorite household chore, believe it or not, I think it's vacuuming. Like, once everything's like picked up, I just like there's some satisfaction there.
Yeah, it's like that finishing touch, you know.
Yeah. And I also really enjoy like being handy. So like if there's anything that needs to be fixed as far as like hardware, I like that. And I also make my own laundry detergent. That's something that's been a fairly recent development.
Yeah, it
and
smells
that's
really
a
good
lot
too.
of fun. But I hate doing the laundry. I hate the laundry.
Yes, you very much do.
I wish I could just like throw away all of our dirty laundry and just never look at it again.
Which I prefer doing the laundry over here to her doing it because she won't throw holy clothes away.
Well,
By holy clothes,
holy clothes.
Yeah, I won't say, when I say holy clothes, I'm not saying like sacred clothes. I'm saying clothes that need to be thrown away. So I just do that for her.
Yeah, but that's my own trauma.
Yes.
I don't hold on to ratty clothes from the kids. I like with the,
right.
I hold on to my own.
Mm-hmm.
But it's my own trauma.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to know what yours are too. You know, what's your favorite household chore? What's your least favorite one? Drop a message to us in the comments. Share it with us, other listeners, wherever you're listening to this episode from. Just go to the Facebook page, the Table for Two podcast, and post it somewhere in the comments. And also know there's no judgment if you say organizing the junk drawer. We won't judge you for that. So.
Yeah.
Well, now we're going to kind of dive into the main topic of this, and you might be asking yourself, because we mentioned in the opening, what is umbrella theology? What is this umbrella thing that you're talking about?
And for those of you who don't know, umbrella theology, it's a framework where God is at the top, and then there's the husband who is like under God and authority, and then under the husband is the wife, and then under the wife is the children. It's kind of successive umbrellas of authority.
Yeah. So
with this,
the idea is that if as people, if we want to be protected by God, right, shielded from harmful things by God, we're going to mirror our lives after this structure of, God's over everything. Then comes the husband. Then the wife is under the husband, and then the kids are under her. And so that's the idea. The umbrella is God's protection, but each layer has another umbrella under it, right? So that God's umbrella covers over everything, but then the husband is over the wife, and then the wife's got another umbrella over the kids, and then the kids are just there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of rooted in interpretations of a lot of different scriptures, but the main one that you'll hear talked about to support this comes from Ephesians 5, and they always read verse, and I'll just read it to you. It's starting Ephesians 5, verse 22. It says, "For example, wives should submit to their husbands as if to the Lord. A husband is the head of his wife, like Christ is head of the church, that is the Savior of the body." So they read that passage, and they interpret that as justification for this umbrella.
Yeah. And really this kind of hierarchical, wow, I can't talk today. This structure, it overemphasizes control, really. It's this whole, like, love versus respect. Like, women need love, but men need respect. And it's, I don't know. It just overemphasizes the husband's control over the wife.
Yeah, well, again, we see.
The wife's
it ends up trying to mirror the home, the family unit that God designed after the business world that we've designed.
Like
right?
the CEO and then the
This is that boss, and then this is the boss who reports to that boss, and you report to that boss who reports to that boss. Yeah. And again, it's all about who has control and authority instead of love and service. And really, when we start focusing our life on who has the authority and control, it's not focusing on God or the Bible. We're actually focusing on things like Eric Cartman.
Respect my authority.
Yes. If you don't know who Eric Cartman is or what we're talking about, good. All right.
But one thing you might be asking is, where does this line of thought come from? Where does this theology come from?
And we kind of gave you a taste of that with that Ephesians 5 passage. But really, it's been made popular by a guy by the name of Bill Gothard, who ironically was not married himself.
I didn't know that.
No, he was not married himself.
Of course not.
Well, anyway, Bill's seminar was about understanding these seven basic life principles, and it was really going through. There was a lot of scripture in it, but it was kind of cherry picked verses from different areas to kind of support these flimsy ideas. But really, at the core of that was this idea of what the home should look like. Again, it goes back to God's in charge, then the husband, then the wife, and then the kids. Also wrapped up in there was the idea that the woman, there's a verse in Timothy where it talks about how the woman is saved through childbirth, right? And it says that, but it doesn't really say that. But they interpret that as meaning that the woman should keep having as many kids as she possibly can. And that reveals how blessed she is by God.
Yeah. But really, it wasn't just Bill Gothard and various evangelical teachers who...
It's still very popular today.
Yes, but basically its rise, this idea, it really wasn't even that popular until like the 60s, I believe. But it was really based on like the evangelical answer to the culture of the time, where there was a lot of discussion about like free love, and I mean we're talking 60s and 70s here. Free love. There was this massive feminist movement. Women were coming into their own, really, and this was this man's and various other evangelical leaders' answer to that, saying, no, this is unholy entirely.
Yeah. And to be honest, that's why we are kind of seeing a rise in its popularity again, theologically and teaching-wise, because we're in an era where, again, the family unit is kind of under attack. And so the evangelical church's answer is to fall back on this
and
same
when we
principle.
say it's under attack, we view our view of it as under attack.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But again, the whole concept though comes from this. Yes, they have Bible verses when they teach it, But that doesn't really mean that it's a biblical teaching. It's really a teaching that uses the Bible, but using culture and patriarchal influence to shape our understanding of it.
Yeah. And I mean, like, really, Jason quoted Ephesians 5:22 about wives submitting to your husbands as, you know, as unto the Lord. But in reality, that's completely ignoring the verse before it.
Right. And so, again, we have to be very careful because, and this is why it's important for each person, whether you're a pastor or a lay person, you need to study the scriptures for yourself, not just a snippet of a verse here and there. I love devotional books. I love the YouVersion Bible app devotionals. Those are great tools.
But it's so easy to twist the message of the verse into whatever you want it to say.
Yeah.
I mean, really, you can make the Bible say anything if you just cherry pick.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to be careful with accepting things that are widely taught in the church, making sure that it's actually rooted in sound theology and not just theology that sounds good.
Right.
But going back to Ephesians 5:21, tell us what that says, babe.
Ephesians 5:21 says this. So this is the verse before the one they used to support this teaching. It says, "And submit to each other out of respect for Christ."
Sounds like you're supposed to submit too, babe.
Yes. So why? Now, again, this is Paul's teaching to the Ephesians. And so why would Paul say that? And then go into these other things. But again, we ignore some key words. Even as we enter, if we skip verse 21 and go into verse 22, we skip something. Because Paul starts verse 22 off by saying, "For example."
Yeah.
And then he uses as an example the fact that the wife should submit to her husband.
Yeah.
And then they definitely ignore the part later on where it talks about how husbands ought to love their wives in the same way as they do their own bodies. Anyone who loves his wife loves himself. That's down in verse 28.
Yeah. And let's face it, if you love your body, taking care of your body means when your body needs something, you're going to make sure that it gets it. You're going to listen to your body's signals for hunger, thirst, and sleep. And you're going to submit yourself to those needs.
Yes. Yeah. And so, again, scriptures, it's read, it's used, but again, cherry picking and separating verses from the wider context. And not only that, Paul even goes on later in that same chapter. At the very end of that discussion, he says, this is a divine mystery. But what I'm talking about here is Christ in the church.
Yeah.
So what Paul is doing in Ephesians 5, his goal is not even really talking about marriage there. Yes, no. He's talking about, but he's using marriage as an example to describe the relationship between Jesus and his bride, Jesus in the church. And he was using a lot of discussion on marriage there, but marriage was not the focus.
No.
And he was trying to communicate to people in a period that was very patriarchal to help them understand the relationship between Jesus and the rest of this group of believers.
Yeah.
Now, another reason we come to this misconception is you go all the way back to Genesis, in the very beginning, when God created the male and female.
Yeah.
Notice it says that in Genesis 1. It talks about that in Genesis 1. God makes them male and female.
And he makes them male and female and gave them authority over
it doesn't say... And so we read that, but we glossed over that in Genesis 1, and we go into Genesis 2, and we read that, okay, well, man was made first, right? Man was made first, so therefore... And then it was out of man that the woman was made. So therefore, that must mean, because the man was made first, that he was given greater authority than the woman. And that's not true.
And actually, I heard a very interesting interpretation of that from a Jewish scholar, where when God put Adam to sleep, where we see it taken as a rib, it wasn't translated, it wasn't actually a rib.
Right.
The word actually means side or half. And so when God took Adam, he literally split Adam into two equal parts. And so the scholar actually said that a lot of Jewish scriptural scholars do not believe that Adam had a gender. Like, he was genderless because he was made in a way that was not necessarily intended to reproduce via sexual encounters. But when God separated him into two, and I'm using him because that's just accepted. When he separated him into two, that's when the gender was constructed in the first place. And so you ended up with two equal parts.
Yeah. Now, again, we're not saying they were male and female. God intentionally created them male and female.
Yeah.
Right? So there is a biological difference between them. But that was so they could fulfill God's command of go therefore and multiply.
Yeah.
Right? That was part of the, God says go forth and multiply and then rule over the earth, is essentially what he says. So, again, just because Adam was made first doesn't mean he was designed to be more important. Matter of fact, God even says after that, the man is to leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, right? So, so he's supposed to leave his old life behind and really essentially form that one new life with his wife. And that's really why, I'm really going off the deep end here. That's really why, though, the Jews considered adultery a crime worthy of capital punishment.
Yeah.
Because
it was literally tearing one flesh into two.
Yes.
It was
murder.
It was murder. It was the equivalent of murder.
Yeah.
In that regard.
Yeah. And so even then, so Jesus ends up later on. You're
Go ahead.
So we'll keep going to Genesis 3. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yes, you are.
So in Genesis 3, right, this is another where we get the misconception.
Yeah.
Because, so we if you're a Christian, you've been in church all, you've heard this story 1,000 times, but I'm going to tell it again. So they're in the garden now. Even Adam and Eve are there together.
Mm-hmm.
And one day they're doing their thing, and the serpent starts talking to Eve. We don't know where Adam is.
Actually, we do. It says he was with her. Her husband who was with her.
See, I ignore that detail too.
Yeah.
But so the serpent starts talking to Eve, and we know how the story goes. He's like, did
God really say that you should not eat the tree, or eat of the tree or you will die?
Yeah.
And Eve answers. Adam could have, but Eve answers. And she answers adding to God's word by saying, well, we must not eat of it and we must not touch it. Well, God never said we must not touch it. But here's one thing that I've actually taken note of. God told Adam not to eat of the tree before Eve even existed. And so Eve is hearing secondhand. Mm-hmm. So she might have gotten that additional information from Adam instead.
Yeah, it's possible.
He's like, you know what, just don't even touch it, or, whatever. But because the serpent is there and he's questioning and he's creating doubt in her mind, and Adam's sitting there not really saying anything, not really responding, she takes the fruit, she eats it, she hands it to her husband, and he eats.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he had the directions entirely from God, like person to person, face to face interaction there, and he doesn't say anything.
Yeah. He just watches it unfold.
And then suddenly they both realize they're naked.
That's ashamed. The grand revelation of man's rebellion against God. They eat from that forbidden fruit. And what's the one thing that they're revealed? The grand thing that gave them knowledge like God in that first moment was we were naked.
Yeah. And so they go and hide.
Mm-hmm.
And God comes looking for them. And God asks them, why are you hiding? And Adam says, well, I knew I was naked. And God's like, who told you were naked? There's no reason for you to be ashamed of being naked at this point. Why are you ashamed?
Again, it was also symbolic of the fact, too, sin awakened
their shame.
They didn't have a reason to be ashamed or afraid until they ate from the tree.
Yeah.
And that's why they immediately tried to cover themselves. It was also a sign, not only did they destroy their relationship with God, in that moment.
They tried to hide from each other.
Yeah, it caused them to hide from one another.
Yeah.
And that's what we see play out the rest of Genesis 3.
And so God starts sharing what the consequences of their sin is.
He says, he gives the different curses of sin. So why don't you go through a few of those real quick?
Okay, so I'm starting in verse... so after God said, I'm naked, or who told you you're naked? In verse 12 of chapter 3, it says, the man said, the woman whom you gave me, she gave me some of the fruit from the tree, and I ate it. So the Lord said to the woman, what is this you have done? And the woman replied, well, the servant tricked me, and I ate. And the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all the cattle and all the living creatures of the field. On your belly you will crawl, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. And I will put hostility between you and the woman, and her offspring and your offspring, and he will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. And to the woman he said, I will greatly increase your labor pains. With pain you will give birth to your children. You will want to control your husband, but he will dominate you. And to Adam he said, because you obeyed your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground is cursed because of you. In painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, but you will eat the grain of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat food until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you will return.
So we'll focus on those last two curses.
Yeah.
But before I get into that, not that I want to ignore the serpents, because there's a really cool part pointing to the future of Christ restoring humanity to that really first prophecy in the Bible about Jesus.
Yeah.
But I do want to say this about the curses of sin. And there's a lot of different opinions on this theologically. But from our framework, from my Wesleyan theological framework, from two clergy members from the Church of the Nazarene, when we look at the curse of sin, we have to understand that this wasn't God giving him a curse as like a punishment. That's not where this curse comes from. Sin itself carried these consequences.
Yeah, there are natural consequences to sin. There's natural consequences to everything we do in life. For example, you stick a fork in the light socket, you get electrocuted. That's not your parent punishing you. That's literally the consequence of sticking a fork in a light socket.
But even if you take the other viewpoint of that, regardless, when Jesus died on the cross, it was an atonement for all of our sin. Not just part of it, not just the sins we committed, all of it. That would include these curses.
Yes. And we try to say, hey, I am no longer under the curse of sin and death because God has forgiven me. And yet, we still try to live under the curse.
Yeah, and so, but these curses work their way into the church. They work their way into theology, into these teachings like the umbrella. And so the first thing I want to point out is that bit in there in the curse to the woman where it says, your desire will be for your husband, but he will dominate you. I like the way the New English Translation Lisa puts that.
You will want to control your husband.
That's why we've had this struggle for centuries of women having equal rights that God created them to have. Right? God designed them to be a partnership.
Yeah, but the thing is, very often we see, like with the feminist movement, the reason why so many people freak out when they hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm a feminist," is because these extreme feminists who want to dominate men. When in reality, the standard feminist is really just wanting to get paid the same.
Yes.
They're wanting to get paid the same for doing the same job.
Which is fair.
But there's this pendulum that's swinging. And on one side of the pendulum is toxic masculinity, and on the other side is toxic feminism.
Neither viewpoint is of God.
No.
But what the viewpoint of God was, I created you both. I created the male and female to multiply and subdue the earth. Yeah. That's the way God designed us. But what the umbrella does is it takes this curse that's on the woman as a natural consequence of sin and says you're trapped here in this role forever.
Yeah.
You're trapped in this undermining. And I always say this especially when I'm doing premarital counseling, I'll say, if you ever look at your wife and say, I'm the boss, you do what I say, I'm the man in the house. That's what they do every time. That little laugh that Nicole just gave.
I know you're joking too, but I cannot help it.
But I also notice as I say that, like the hairs on the back of Nicole's neck stand up because she's ready to fight. And it's almost a universal response from women when you say that.
And really the only women who don't respond that way are the ones who are so browbeaten, so used to living in this subservient role.
Yeah. And so what the umbrella does, instead of focusing on the redemption of Christ in this dynamic, it focuses instead on the idea that, no, the woman, you have to suppress that natural reaction, that God, I say a God-given reaction to that statement. You have to suppress it and submit to the authority of your husband. Whereas the alternative, what the Bible really is teaching us, beginning in Genesis 1 and 2, through the death and resurrection of Jesus, is that no, Jesus died to do away with that curse, to restore woman to her rightful place as partner with man. And really,
so
God's
that we
been
can do what God has called us to do in the first place.
And even if I'm skipping over centuries of history to get to that point between Genesis and Jesus. Mm-hmm. But I'll also say this. There are glimpses in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Now, it's crude to our modern understanding of things.
But there's glimpses of God trying to restore that design of men and women being equal partners. And you also see a downward slope of people's spiritual relationship with God that parallels their treatment of women.
Yeah.
In fact, a commentary that I read in Judges, if you look at the book of Judges, the people of Israel, when they're following God, there's women that are in leadership, women like Deborah, there's women who are revered like Jael. And then you get to the end of Judges where they're sacrificing their daughters and they're cutting up concubines and sending them to the far reaches of Israel. But if you notice, the nation's relationship with God is so corrupt at that point.
Yes.
It's awful.
Yeah. Now, the other side of this is, we just focus on the woman aspect of it. Skipping down to here. But the other side of this coin is, now, if you stick to this belief that the curse is in place, and you're sticking with this umbrella theology, not only does it hold woman down under the man's headship, but what that also does to the man is it puts all this extra pressure on him in the relationship. And that's where the curse that comes in for man at the end of chapter 3 comes in.
Yeah.
It's men have this
expectation to provide.
Yeah, and this internal struggle of, if I'm not providing, if I'm not making sure my family's taken care of, then I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And all men, I'm speaking, maybe I shouldn't say all men, but most of us as guys can relate to that. We feel that pressure. If our family's struggling, we feel like it's our responsibility to do it alone, to go out and bridge those gaps. And sometimes if our wives go to work, we start to feel like lesser of men. And also that's kind of where this whole men make more than women thing comes into play too, because as men we feel like less of men if the woman's earning more than us.
Yeah, actually, I read an interesting study about that too, where there was a study done about the reasons for divorce, the cause for divorce in marriages, both in secular relationships and in Christian relationships, and it's a 50-50 split. And the most common reason for divorce, outside of the most common reason that led to the divorce, was financial struggles, and the percentage actually went up when the woman made more money than the man, because the man felt less masculine and less like the provider that he feels like he's supposed to be. And that was equal for both the secular household and the Christian household, with one exception. husbands and wives who believe that they were equal partners, and they were designed to be equal partners and live in mutual submission, their percentage went down drastically when the wife made more.
Interesting.
Yeah. And in fact, more husbands felt more confident when their wife was making more money because they felt like they had married up.
That's a very interesting thing, because again, it really, to me, exposes, if we live under the umbrella theology and we take that as the truth, what it does is it creates pressure, and we have down here in our notes that we're going to talk about spiritual manipulation, but I think it's just manipulation in general.
Yeah.
Including using the Bible too. So men will use the Bible and going to church and things like that to tell the woman, okay, you have to submit to my headship. You have to do things my way. But what I've observed from my role as a pastor is oftentimes couples that practice this complementarian viewpoint like this under the umbrella, the wife will say she submits, but then at the same time, if she knows she believes her husband's the head, but she also wants what she wants, and so she
does what she can to control the situation
and manipulate
her husband to make the decision that she wants him to make.
Yeah. So instead of being partners in this, they become partners in the sense of, as in Republicans and Democrats are partners in things. They are trying to manipulate the other one. Either trying to manipulate till they have the power or the other one has the power, right? And it's one of the things that annoys me the most about sitcoms when we're watching. I can't remember, what's the new one with Matt LeBlanc?
Man of the Family?
I can't remember what it's called, but it's a really funny series, but there's this constant power struggle between he and his wife.
Family Man. No. I don't know.
But there's a constant power struggle between them on who's running the household. But that's what happens in our marriages. It is a struggle onto who's in charge and who's getting their way. And that's not a partnership. That's not working together. That's a political alliance. Right? And political alliances are fragile.
Man with a Plan.
Man with a Plan was the name of the show. Yeah, if you want to check that show, it's good. If you like Friends, you like Matt, the guy that plays Joey from Friends, Matt LeBlanc is Joey. But it's essentially Joey is a grown-up in a real-life relationship with a family. It's hilarious.
It is.
But again, marriage is strongest when both voices matter and power is shared, not hoarded. So kind of a good way to look at that and see where the Bible truly is talking about this mutual submission is in Jesus' own teaching on marriage, right? He gets asked in Mark 10 by the Pharisees, I believe it was, about, is it legal for a man to divorce his wife? And of course, Jesus does the most Jesus thing of all, like he does all the time in the gospel. He answers the question without answering the question directly.
Yes.
And rather than just say that, he says something effective. God allowed divorce to happen because your hearts were hard.
Yeah.
Right? And let's face it, what a guy would do before divorce was legalized in Scripture was he would probably just either kill his wife or leave her in the woods.
Yeah. There was a lot of homicide between spouses because of situations where the man just didn't want to deal with his wife anymore, and they weren't. They were somewhat polygamous at the time, but at the same time, not always. Yeah,
but the other side of that. So Jesus says that to him, right? He addresses that part of it. And if you're a divorced person, listen to this. Again, God doesn't want us to get divorced, but God also understands. We don't go to when a person dies. Does God want a person to die?
No, but we don't go and preach up the dead body.
Yes. When a marriage is dead,
sometimes it's better to just put it out of its...
It's better to bury it.
Yeah.
Because again, often what happens is one person is trying to save the marriage, so it's like they're working together to do CPR on a dummy, right? One person is doing the chest compressions, but the other person is holding a pillow over its face.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
It's dead. So if you're divorced and listen to this, that's taking us way off topic. But Jesus goes on from that teaching, and he talks about how God designed marriage to be between one man and one woman for life, in Mark chapter 10, verse 9, now this is from the Common English Bible, it says, "Therefore humans must not pull apart what God has put together." So these are the words of Jesus. And that phrase where he says what God has put together is an interesting phrase. Some translations will use the phrasing what God has joined together. Mm-hmm. The idea there is this idea of a yoke between two oxen, right? Oxen pulling, picture an oxen pulling a cart full of whatever, people, cornbread, whatever
rocks.
It is, full of rocks. But the oxen have this bar that connects them. And they're connected side by side, working together to pull that cart. That's the idea Jesus is using to describe marriage. Two oxen side by side, working together to pull a cart. And what Jesus is saying is what God has joined together, what God has yoked together, man should not pull apart. But the imagery Jesus uses is not one of one oxen in front of the other pulling the other one, because that would hurt the oxen.
Yeah. Or even two, like one oxen that's much stronger than the other, and there's a strong partner and a weak partner. No, these are two equally yoked oxen, two very strong, very, very capable on their own oxen that are just made stronger when they're together.
Yeah. So mutual submission is a biblical concept. It's not it's not about who's in charge, but how we love one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting about this is that Paul uses that reference later when he talks about being to not be unequally yoked with a non-believer. And the reason for that unequal, like specifically where he's addressing faith, is because when two people are not of one mind, it's easy to try to pull the other person to one direction or another. And so you don't want to be unequally yoked with someone who's just as strong as you are, but heading in a different direction. But the point of being equally yoked, period, is really what Paul is talking about too, is you're not having one person submit and one person lead. It's you're both working on this marriage together. You're both working on this life together.
Yeah, you're living in the freedom of who you are, but in the freedom of that life shared with the other person.
Yeah, and when you both have the same goals and destination in mind, you're both going to be headed in that direction with equal fervor.
Yeah. And so what this view of marriage is called is egalitarianism. And it's a biblical concept. Mm-hmm. And so now that we know what it is, we've kind of defined it, what does it actually look like in a marriage? And this is something Nicole and I try to practice, is that we're equal partners in this. You've already heard some things where we're probably a little different than most couples. I do most of the cooking.
And I'm the one that likes to actually use the power tools.
Yeah. I handle the laundry. And
I make the laundry soap.
And she makes the laundry soap. Yeah. So we partner in these different tasks, and when it comes to making decisions for our family, I don't look at Nicole and say, I'm the man of the house, we're going to do it this way. We have a discussion about it. Now, there are times where she will yield to me on a decision, but that's her choice. It's not because I've demanded it of her.
And vice versa. There have been times where you've yielded, and then there are times where I'll just tell you what's happening and you'll go with it, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. You'll tell me what's happening and I'll go with it. Yeah,
and a common question we get is, well, what happens if you guys can't make it a shared decision?
What happens is the decision's not made at all.
Yeah, we wait, we continue, we either pause, whatever it is, until we can reach a decision together, or we just let it go because it wasn't something meant for us to do or to have, because we're not in agreement upon it. Yeah. And the times where we have overstepped that,
it's been awful.
Yeah. But egalitarianism is learning to lead by example, not control.
Yeah.
Love by example, not coercion. That's what it is. Mutual submission doesn't mean weakness. It means trusting each other with strength.
Yeah. And the thing is like when I am strong enough to make a decision on my own without having you be the final word, it kind of releases a little bit of your mental load. Mm-hmm. Because I see your frustration whenever I can't decide where I want to eat. You're just like, wait, I have to make this decision on my own.
Just tell me what you want to eat. Now, in fairness, the last time a woman knew what she wanted to eat.
I'm gonna murder you. Not really. That was not a confession. But no, the mental load is a real thing, and it's such a hard burden. Like, I've seen it talked about in women's groups a lot, where women will talk about how, they have to make all the decisions for the family with, like, okay, the menu for the week, and if the family can afford to do summer camp, if the kids can afford to go to summer camp, or what clothes to get, what sales to take advantage of at the stores, and what groceries to buy, it's this massive mental load. But when we are, like, with this idea of, like, the man is in charge, I would have to force that load onto you. And it would just be this constant, okay, I have all these decisions that I have to make as a man of the house and all this stuff. When in reality, we were never meant to carry that load on our own at all. The idea that women have to manage everything in the home is a whole other issue, that because the man's in charge, a lot of men force the function of the family on the woman to do on her own. And again, it's not a mental load that she was ever meant to carry alone either. It was something that you and I, as a married couple, we talk through these things. Are we going to do summer camp this year with our kids? Okay, we need to go get groceries. What are we doing this week? And we talk about it. And I mean, well, Jason does most of the cooking, so I let him make the decision.
There are times where I don't ask anybody's opinion when I want for dinner, except for my own.
Yeah, and that's okay, because you're the one doing the cooking. But it's this idea of sharing the entire load of the marriage, the decisions, the burden, everything.
Yeah, and now, keep in mind, I've had this viewpoint for a very long time.
I'm fairly new to it.
But one of the things that kind of really reinforced it for me, and really I feel like strengthened our relationship, was when I took my first lead pastor assignment. We had been associate for a while, but we had taken our first one. And when we agreed to take that first assignment, you and I were not in agreement on whether that church was the right fit or not.
No.
And rather than me yield to her uncertainty and pause and wait with her, I went ahead with it. And it was a difficult road.
Now, and in fairness to you, I was still very much in this complementarian, you are the man of the house, you have to make this decision, and I will submit to your decision. And it was awful. Yeah,
we were both in a very tough situation.
I mean, we made some amazing friends there, and we
grew as ministers there.
But it was
hard because we were starting from a place where we weren't necessarily in alignment with each other. And so when things got tough at the church, I knew it was my decision to get us there. And I knew it was your decision. Yeah, and Nicole knew it. And so where did the pressure shift? The pressure shifted all to me. Rather than us shouldering the load together and working together in ministry, it was... And as much as I tried to shoulder the load with you, the problem was I was never wanting that load in the first place. Yeah. And when there's somebody that's not really wanting to be there, their heart's not in shouldering that load. Yeah, exactly. But we grew through that, and our understanding of what it really looks like to be mutual submissive together grew from that time period. That's ever since then when we've made decisions, especially when it comes to transitioning our family from one place to another, it's a decision we make together. Now, as our kids are getting older, they're going to start being brought into those discussions. Because we're just not going to uproot them for no reason. Yeah. Now, the church I'm currently serving at, to put them at rest, we're not having those discussions right now. No. And our kids are, at least once a month,
double checking. We're not planning on leaving, are we?
Yes.
No.
But again, we have conversations, mutual respect, all the while all of us knowing that God is ultimately the one who's the head of our house.
Yeah.
He's the one leading.
Yep.
And our job is to submit to him. So maybe you've been listening, maybe you're holding an umbrella, and maybe you're poking holes in one. I don't know where you're at in your relationship or your understanding right now. Or maybe you're just tossing the whole thing in the recycling bin.
But regardless, we just really hope that this episode helps you take a fresh look, a restful look too, a fresh look at what submission really means in the way of Jesus.
And I know so much of our culture right now is on this idea of power plays and taking charge and authority. But that's not the way God designed our relationships. Matter of fact, that's not how God's own relationship works within the Trinity.
No.
It's about partnership. It's about freedom that comes through love.
And it's about serving the other. So if today's episode gave you something to think about or laugh about, go ahead and follow or subscribe wherever you listen.
Hey, and do us a favor, don't forget to leave a review or share this episode with someone you love. It really helps us get the word out.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at Table for Two Podcast. So come and join the conversation.
Grace and peace to you in the name of Jesus.
Through storms and swallowed our noise, church keys in hand, coffee in mugs, our lives held together by grace and a few hugs. They said she submits, we said we both do. It's not about ladders, it's me and you, serving the kingdom in aprons and jeans, lifelines and calloused hands and holy routines. At this table for two, there's room for you. Pull up a chair, we'll tell the truth. From love and faith